I never imagined one promise could upend my entire world. Yet here I am, replaying every conversation with my parents and wondering if I missed signs of the turmoil to come. My name is Rick, and I'm 28 years old. For as long as I can, remember my parents, Laura and Sam, spoke openly about a special fund they'd set aside for my future wedding. They did the same for my older sister, Fiona, who is almost a decade ahead of me in life. Growing up, I watched Fiona dream about a lavish ceremony, complete with string quartets and cascading flower arches. She made it clear that when she got married, she'd go all out, just as our parents had promised. By the time Fiona turned 30, she found her partner, Armand, and they got engaged. True to their word, our parents handed over a generous sum to help her realize the wedding of her dreams. Fiona's big day was nothing short of magnificent, with a massive guest list, a venue that overlooked the ocean, and a breathtaking designer gown that turned heads. Even though I was still in college when all of this happened, I felt proud and happy for her. I assumed I would have my turn eventually, and the knowledge that my parents had prepared the same gift for me filled me with reassurance. I never doubted that the same support awaited me when I was ready to tie the knot. Life moved on quickly after her celebration. Fiona relocated to a different city with Armand, focusing on her career in marketing, while I moved forward with my own life. I found a job in digital media, met my fiancée, Camilla, and slowly mapped out a future full of possibilities. Meanwhile, I never once thought to question whether my parents might rescind the promise they'd made about my wedding fund. It was a given, like a family tradition passed down across decades of planning. But then came a phone call that set everything in motion. One evening as I was cleaning up from dinner, my mother called and asked me to stop by the house. Her voice sounded tense. She mentioned that it was important, but wouldn't say more. My mind raced with speculation. Maybe Dad had found a hidden stash of antiques in the garage, or they'd decided to retire early. I certainly didn't anticipate the bombshell they'd dropped that night. When I arrived at my parents' place, I noticed how quiet the living room was. Dad was in his usual armchair, but there was none of his typically warm, welcoming energy. Mom was perched on the edge of the couch, looking as if she'd been crying. Even before a single word was spoken, I could sense that something was seriously wrong. My heart pounded, imagining a health crisis or a financial meltdown. My father cleared, his throat exchanging a worried glance with my mother. Then he explained that several months ago, Fiona had faced a medical emergency that required an expensive procedure. With no time to gather funds, she turned to them for help, and they'd given her the money they'd saved for my wedding. The details about her medical condition were sparse, but the gist was undeniable. The entire sum intended for my future wedding was gone. For a moment I felt the room spinning. That promise I'd clung to for so many years vanished in a heartbeat. It wasn't just about the money, it was the principle, the feeling that I'd been misled, or at least kept in the dark until there was no turning back. Part of me wanted to storm out, but another part of me felt guilty because Fiona had apparently been in dire straits. As I sat there, grappling with disbelief, my mom reached for my hand, tears welling up in her eyes. "We never wanted this to happen," she whispered. "But we had no choice, please understand." My entire body felt numb. I wanted to be understanding, but a knot twisted in my stomach. For years, I'd seen that fund as a stepping stone to the wedding I'd dreamed of. Now with a few words, that vision crumbled before my eyes. I must have looked as though I was carved from stone because neither of my parents moved an inch after delivering the news. We all sat in a prolonged silence, each of us struggling to find the right words. My father finally spoke again, explaining that he and my mother had agonized over how to tell me. They believed Fiona's situation was urgent enough to justify redirecting the funds, and they'd hoped to replenish the money before I got engaged. Unfortunately, life hadn't cooperated, and their finances were still in a bind. I tried to speak, but nothing coherent came out. My initial reaction was anger, pure, unfiltered anger that made my face hot and my fingertips tingle. Yet beneath that anger lurked a twisted sense of guilt. If Fiona's procedure was so vital, how could I begrudge her the funds? That single thought tore me in half. Compassion for her crisis on one side, bitterness at losing my dream wedding on the other. Eventually, I whispered that I needed a moment alone and walked out the front door. The cold night air hit me like a slap. I remembered how years ago I'd fantasized about a scenic venue, a heartfelt ceremony, and a reception under twinkling lights. Camilla and I had talked about it often, sharing ideas for color schemes and menu options. Now it felt like someone had stolen more than money. They'd stolen the certainty of that future celebration. I paced around the yard, glaring at the moon as though it might offer guidance. My parents were good people. They'd supported me in countless ways over the years. I knew they hadn't acted out of malice, but I couldn't deny the sting of betrayal. All those times Mom had told me, "Just wait until it's your turn." Rick, echoed in my mind like a cruel joke. It was never actually going to be my turn. After a few minutes, I went back inside. My mother's eyes were red as though she'd been crying silently the entire time I was gone. Dad looked pale and haggard, the weight of his guilt etched into every line on his face. I felt a jolt of sorrow. This wasn't easy for them. They were torn between two children, forced to choose in a moment of crisis. And though I was the one left without a wedding fund, I recognized they had done it out of love for Fiona. "Is she okay?" I asked quietly, not meeting their eyes. It was the only question that mattered in that moment. If Fiona's life had truly been on the line, then maybe I could process this without resentment festering in my heart. My father admitted he didn't know all the details, only that Fiona had required a procedure to preserve certain possibilities for the future. It cost far more than she had saved, and time wasn't on her side. I sighed heavily, feeling a tangled mess of emotions. On the drive home, I tried to think everything through logically. My wedding was still going to happen, just not in the grand way I'd anticipated. Camilla and I could budget, downsize, and still create beautiful memories. Wasn't that more important than a lavish ceremony? A part of me knew the answer was yes. Yet, another part stubbornly clung to the unfairness of the situation. When I reached my apartment, I found Camilla waiting anxiously on the couch. She leaped up the moment I walked in, eyes filled with concern. I'd texted her a cryptic message earlier, saying something was wrong with my parents. Now I had to figure out how to explain what had happened without bursting into frustrated tears. I settled beside her and recounted the entire conversation with my parents. As I spoke, Camilla grew quiet, her expression shifting from shock to empathy. She placed a hand on my arm when I finished, her eyes brimming with kindness. "We'll figure it out," she said softly. Still, my heart pounded. A complicated knot of anger, sympathy, and confusion churned inside me, and I couldn't imagine how to resolve any of it. Camilla tried to reassure me that we could still have a meaningful ceremony without my parents' financial support. She reminded me that love, not money, was the foundation of any marriage. I knew she was right, but the emotional ache didn't vanish that easily. I spent the next few days walking around in a fog, alternating between replaying my parents' confession and wondering how Fiona could have needed such an enormous sum so quickly. Despite my jumbled feelings, I couldn't ignore the urge to learn more. A part of me hoped that if I understood Fiona's medical crisis better, I'd find closure or at least a sense of peace. After a few sleepless nights, I decided to call my sister directly. She picked up on the second ring, her tone guarded. Clearly, our parents had told her they'd broken the news to me. "Hey, Fee," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mom and Dad explained what happened. I need to know you're okay." It felt awkward, phrasing it that way, but I genuinely cared about her well-being. She hesitated before answering. "I'm fine, Rick. Really. The procedure was a precaution," she said briskly. "I'd rather not go into the details, but it was time-sensitive and expensive." Her words were clipped, as though she was both embarrassed and defensive. I swallowed hard, noticing that she hadn't apologized or expressed any sympathy about the wedding fund. Instead, she reiterated that she'd been in a difficult position, and our parents had stepped in. The conversation felt stilted, with each of us dancing around the elephant in the room. The money and what it meant. I finally summoned the courage to say, "I'm trying to understand, Fee, because I've spent my entire life hearing about how we both had this wedding fund. You used yours for your ceremony. Now I find out mine's gone too. I don't blame you for needing help, but I can't pretend it doesn't hurt." There was a pause before she responded, her voice tight. "Rick, I get it, but when you're staring down a medical issue that can change your entire future, you don't have the luxury of thinking about anyone else's plans. I'm sorry if that sounds harsh, but that's the reality." Then her voice softened marginally. "If it's any consolation, I truly hope your wedding is still wonderful. It just won't be as big." Those words stung more than I cared to admit. I mumbled something about understanding her perspective and ended the call. For a while, I just sat there with the phone in my hand, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and resentment. She had a point. Medical emergencies don't wait. But I couldn't shake the feeling that my dream was being dismissed as trivial. Over. The next week, I tried to keep busy. Camilla and I started brainstorming ways to cut costs for the wedding. Maybe a smaller venue, fewer guests, a more modest menu. It was doable, but each compromise felt like a reminder of what I'd lost. My parents called a few times, offering to do whatever they could, within their limited means, to help. They made suggestions like asking relatives to pitch in or scaling back on decorations. Each call only drove home how different my wedding would be compared to Fiona's. Meanwhile, I caught myself obsessing over old photos from Fiona's lavish celebration. The band, the couture dress, the elaborate floral displays, all of it made me cringe now. I didn't want to resent my sister or turn my wedding into a competition, but the discrepancy was impossible to ignore. Camilla noticed my turmoil and encouraged me to meet her parents for dinner. She figured having supportive in-laws might lighten my mood. We had a pleasant evening, full of well-meaning advice about focusing on what truly matters, our union and our love. On the drive home, though, I couldn't help feeling guilty for still longing for something grander. Was I just being shallow? Or was it normal to grieve a dream that I'd held onto for so long? That night I tossed and turned, my mind looping through guilt, envy, and confusion. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this story wasn't over. A part of me sensed there was more to Fiona's situation than she'd let on. And if I was going to find peace, I had to learn the whole truth. My suspicions about Fiona's situation kept gnawing at me. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that there was a hidden layer to this story. She'd been incredibly protective of the details, which struck me as odd. After all, we were siblings who'd confided in each other countless times. Why be so cagey now? I decided to dig deeper, though I wasn't proud of my methods. I reached out to an old family friend, Mrs. Hanson, who'd known Fiona and me since we were toddlers. She was the type who could coax secrets out of a stone. If anyone had inside information, it was her. When I visited Mrs. Hanson at her cozy home, she served me tea and lemon cookies. We chatted about mundane topics first, work, the weather, Camilla's new job, before I cautiously brought up Fiona. Mrs. Hanson's eyes flickered with concern. "I'm not sure how much I should share," she said gently, "but I know your sister's been through a tumultuous time. I believe she was scared to death of losing something crucial in her life. Perhaps that explains her desperation." Her words confirmed at least part of my suspicion. Fear had driven Fiona to make a drastic decision. But fear of what? I pressed a bit more, but Mrs. Hanson shook her head, unwilling to betray Fiona's confidence. She just hinted that the procedure had a personal dimension that Fiona didn't want widely known. I returned home feeling both relieved and frustrated. Something serious had indeed happened to Fiona, yet I was nowhere closer to understanding the specifics. In the days that followed, I tried to let it go. Maybe this was simply something she needed to handle privately. If so, what gave me the right to pry? But the frustration persisted. Our entire family dynamic had changed over this financial exchange, and I felt trapped in a fog of half-truths. One afternoon, Camilla found me hunched over a list of wedding budget items, crossing out everything that seemed too extravagant. She stroked my back gently. "Rick, why don't you just talk to Fiona?" "Again? Ask her directly. If she won't tell you, maybe you have to accept it and move on." Her logic was sound. But I couldn't stand the idea of settling into resentment fueled by ignorance. "I just feel like there's a piece of the puzzle missing," I admitted. "I want to know if I'm sacrificing my dream wedding for something that was truly essential. Right now it feels like I'm left in the dark." Camilla sighed and kissed my cheek. "I understand, but don't let this consume you to the point where our marriage starts off drenched in bitterness." She was right, of course. I resolved to speak to Fiona one more time, calmly and openly. That weekend, I drove to the city where she lived. It was a drizzly afternoon when I knocked on her apartment door. Armand answered, his usually cheerful face clouded with concern at the sight of me. He invited me in, and soon Fiona appeared. She looked both surprised and wary, standing there in a cardigan and jeans, fiddling with the hem anxiously. I took a breath. "I'm not here to fight," I began, keeping my voice low. "I just need to understand. Please help me see your side of this." Her eyes darted to Armand, who gave a small nod. She hesitated before motioning me to sit at the kitchen table. The three of us settled down, the atmosphere tense. She started off by reiterating the same lines about a critical medical necessity and the unbearable pressure of a looming deadline. However, as I gently prodded, her guard began to slip. Eventually, she admitted something I hadn't expected. I panicked because I thought if I didn't act right away, I'd lose my chance. "Forever, our family doesn't have a history of longevity when it comes to these issues." Her voice trembled. "I know it cost you your wedding fund, and I'm sorry, but I couldn't see another option. Mom and Dad offered without hesitation, and In my desperation, I said yes. While her words were more revealing than before, I sensed she was still holding back, but her trembling voice and tearful eyes reflected genuine fear and regret. For the first time, my anger softened. Still, I needed to know one final thing. Fiona, did you ever intend to pay them back, so the fund could be replenished? She swallowed hard. I wanted to, but it's complicated. Armand and I have debts, medical bills on top of everything else. The truth is, I don't see how we can make that happen anytime soon. My heart sank. This was the moment the reality of my situation truly hit home. I left Fiona's apartment feeling like I'd walked straight into a storm cloud. My emotions collided wildly, sympathy and betrayal, understanding and resentment. On one hand, she'd done what she thought she had to do. On the other, my wedding. Dreams lay in tatters, with little hope of restitution. On the drive back, I replayed her words in my head. She was genuinely shaken by whatever health scare she'd faced, and our parents had offered the money unconditionally. The blame game was pointless now. The result was the same. My carefully nurtured wedding plans had been tossed aside. I tried to focus on Camilla's perspective. She believed that a smaller wedding could still be a wonderful start to our marriage, and deep down, I knew she was right. Yet my frustration lingered. That evening I called my mother. She sounded relieved to hear from me. "Rick, we've been so worried," she said gently. I couldn't hold back my questions any longer. "Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner? Maybe we could have found another way. A loan, a fundraiser. Anything besides draining the entire wedding fund. Did you ever think about that?" Her hesitant sigh crackled through the phone. "Sweetheart, we did consider alternatives, but Fiona was on a strict timeline. We had to act fast, and we assumed we'd have time to replenish the money before you got engaged. We never intended for you to be hurt by this." I rubbed my temples, feeling a surge of exhaustion. "What about paying it back now?" I ventured, though I suspected the answer. "Could you and Dad manage to return even part of it?" She paused. "We're not in a position to do so right now. Your father and I have had some setbacks with our investments, and you know the cost of living keeps going up. We're so sorry." Her apology was genuine, but it did nothing to fill the financial gap or soothe the sting. After hanging up, I let out a long breath. I had to face reality. The money was gone, likely for good. Dwelling on it would only poison my relationship with my family. I had to find a way forward. Over the next couple of weeks, Camilla and I launched ourselves into wedding planning with renewed determination. We scoured local venues for off-peak deals, opted for a smaller guest list, and learned a few do-it-yourself tricks for decorations. Though it was humbling to realize we couldn't afford the glamorous event I'd once pictured, it also felt strangely empowering to take control of what we could manage. During this time, Fiona called me periodically, offering lukewarm words of support. She'd ask how the planning was going and then trail off awkwardly. Each conversation felt like it tiptoed around a giant elephant in the room. She never brought up the idea of repaying the fund, and I never asked. There was too much raw emotion, on both sides, and I preferred to keep our dialogue civil rather than dredge up more conflict. Meanwhile, Camilla's parents stepped in. They weren't wealthy, but they had enough savings to offer us a modest contribution. It helped cover some of the basics, and we were deeply grateful. I couldn't help noticing that my own parents, overwhelmed by guilt and financial strain, weren't able to chip in much beyond moral support. The balance felt off, but I tried to accept it as the new normal. As the date inched closer, I found unexpected solace in simpler details, picking out flowers that Camilla loved, choosing music that resonated with us as a couple, and preparing heartfelt vows that captured our journey. Maybe I didn't have the picture-perfect wedding I'd always envisioned, but I was discovering that intimacy and love could overshadow a big budget. Still, an undercurrent of tension remained. I wondered if Fiona would attend the wedding at all, and if she did, what kind of atmosphere her presence would create. Part of me felt she should stay away, sparing me the reminder of what had been lost. Another part recognized that she was family, and her absence might hurt worse. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the wedding day itself would be a turning point. Either I'd find a way to let go of this resentment and move forward with my new life, or I'd allow it to fester, forever coloring my relationship with my family. The morning of my wedding dawned with a crisp clarity that felt almost surreal. Camilla and I had chosen a small garden venue on the outskirts of town. It wasn't extravagant, but the sprawling green lawn and blooming lilacs had an understated charm that put me at ease. As the sun peeked over the horizon, I felt a flutter of anticipation. Despite everything, we had made it to this day. Close friends and relatives began to arrive. My parents showed up early, exchanging tearful smiles with me as they stepped onto the lawn. I could tell they were relieved I'd allowed them to be here without any lingering hostility. Deep down, I knew I couldn't punish them forever. They had made a judgment call in a moment of crisis, and while it hurt, it was time to focus on the future. Then Fiona arrived with Armand by her side. My stomach clenched slightly as I saw her. She looked uneasy, standing by the entrance in a simple, elegant dress. For a split second, I imagined the opulent wedding she'd enjoyed, but the thought quickly passed. She wasn't the enemy, just someone caught in a situation that forced her to make hard choices. I walked over and nodded politely. We exchanged quick hugs, awkward but sincere. "Thank you for coming," I said, keeping my voice steady. She mumbled that she wouldn't have missed it for the world. We didn't discuss money, regrets, or broken promises. Perhaps that was best left for another time. The ceremony began. Camilla and I stood under a wooden arch Camilla's dad had crafted by hand, adorned with fresh flowers in lavender and cream. As I recited my vows, I glanced out at the assembled guests. They represented different chapters of my life, stitched together in a moment of unity. My heart swelled with gratitude that they were here to witness this milestone. After our vows, the small crowd erupted in applause. We shared our first kiss as husband and wife, and for a blissful moment, all the stress of the past months melted away. This was our day, a testament to our resilience and our love. No grand hall or extravagant gown could replace the warmth of this moment. The reception was modest but joyful. We had a buffet-style meal instead of a plated dinner, and a friend, with a decent sound system, doubled as our DJ. People danced in the open air, laughter mingling with the chirping of crickets as evening approached. At one point, my dad pulled me aside, tears in his eyes. "I'm so proud of you," he said simply, before hugging me. I hugged him back, overwhelmed by a mix of emotions, relief, love, and acceptance. As the night went on, I noticed Fiona, sitting alone at one of the tables, sipping a glass of water. Summoning my courage, I joined her. She glanced up with a tentative smile. "Beautiful ceremony," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded and took a seat. We sat in. Silence for a while, watching the dance floor. Finally, she sighed. "Rick, I know I haven't said this properly, but I am sorry about what happened. I know what was lost, and I never wanted things to turn out this way." I studied her face, seeing the genuine regret there. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied quietly. "It's been hard, but maybe we can move forward." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "If there's ever a chance to make it right, I promise I'll do whatever I can." For the first time, I believed her. Maybe she truly would find a way to repay our parents or help Camilla and me in the future. Or maybe she wouldn't. But either way, the anger I'd harbored began to lift, replaced by a tentative sense of hope. As the evening wound down, Camilla and I said our goodbyes, heading off to a small cabin we'd rented nearby for our wedding night. In the car, I held her hand, feeling the comforting weight of her wedding band against my palm. This wasn't the grand, glossy wedding I'd initially envisioned. But it was real, deeply real, and that authenticity mattered more than the trappings of luxury. Just before I drifted off to sleep, something flickered in my mind. Fiona had told me she wouldn't let this debt go unresolved. That promise might change everything in the future. In the meantime, I had discovered that the true value of our celebration came from love, unity, and commitment, not from a hefty bank account, and that realization, unexpectedly, made this day all the more extraordinary. That's the end of today's story. Did things turn out the way you thought, or were there some surprises along the way? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to hit the like button. And if you haven't joined the community yet, now's the perfect time. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're always the first to catch new stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next adventure.